A neighbor is supposed to be your friend.
My father was a good neighbor.
We did get along with him. There was never any tension.
But not all friendships are built to last.
It all went downhill.
Any person that fixated on any kind of problem just starts to escalate.
Jimmy had stopped being the nice guy.
He was afraid of his next-door neighbor.
He was there to kill him.
Jimmy could have done him in easily.
Sometimes the saying, good fences make good neighbors, is dead on.
I could have made it different, but I didn't.
Hot, sunny, Flagami, Florida. The kind of place everyone wants to call home. It was vibrant, family-oriented, and neighbors helped each other out.
We were all hard-working people. We all stuck together. It was all mixed. There were different type of people.
I grew up in that neighborhood, and as a kid, we were all over playing with other kids. It was a very social, not unlike like a Leave It to Beaver type neighborhood.
Like many Cuban expats, our 62-year-old neighbor, Baldomero Fernandez, built a life here.
We grew up in a home that had a huge yard, so my brother and I were always playing outside in the yard, and it was right on the canal. As kids, we loved it. I loved my house. We had the perfect house.
After spending his working years as a bellhop at Miami International Airport, Baldomero had more than earned his retirement. Now it was time to enjoy it.
My parents, they were founding members of the church that was a couple blocks away. And they were there when the new church got built, and they'd always volunteer at the church fair.
Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit.
My parents, they were just friendly people.
And they were looking forward to their new neighbor, 29-year-old Jimmy Escoto, moving in next door.
My parents were friends with Jimmy's mother, Olga. She lived there for some time, and then Jimmy moved in.
Jimmy was fresh out of the Army. He'd moved back to Florida to be closer to his mom, Olga, his stepbrother, Fred, and his 8-year-old son, Anthony.
Hanging out with my dad was always a great thing. He had a huge heart. The biggest heart in my eyes.
Baldomero was happy to see a responsible, doting young father move in beside him.
My dad loved me, loved my mother, even though they were divorced. So the family aspect was definitely there.
Jimmy was a great addition to the neighborhood. At first glance, everything seemed perfect.
Jimmy was just, you know, cool neighbor. And we were allowed to go to his house. That was very exciting.
He had exotic fish, you know, saltwater marine aquariums.
It's so long.
Anything he caught in the ocean, he would put in his tank.
You want to feed it, or you want me to feed it?
Me.
You want to feed it?
Yeah.
My father also had Burmese python.
It squeezes their prey.
And it was a pretty big one. He would bring home the mice from the pet shop, and he would feed the snake.
If anyone had told us then that one neighbor would end up as predator and the other as prey, we would never have believed them. Because right now, the future looked bright for both neighbors, and Jimmy was getting ready to serve his country in a whole other way.
When James first moved into the house, he started a nursing program at Jackson Memorial Hospital.
I figured that he just really wanted to help people, and he was meant to be a nurse.
The trouble was, going back to school took a toll on Jimmy's bank account. Good thing that wasn't going to stop him.
Jimmy worked hard for everything he had. Who was going to tell him any different?
And Baldomero saw that and decided to help him out by hiring him to do odd jobs.
Jimmy didn't have a job, and he needed some money, and Baldomero needed somebody to help him do some work. They helped each other.
Jimmy would go his way to help people.
So did Baldomero. His years of helping had made him a big deal in the community.
My dad was very involved in politics, so every time he got a chance to meet a politician or help out a politician, he would.
Mr. Fernandez was active in the politics of the village, and a lot of people knew him and liked him very much.
He had ties with mayors for different cities around because he had helped them with their political campaigns. It was his way of having a connection to the community and helping out, giving back to the city.
Mr. Fernandez may have had a little bit of an ego with respect to some of his connections, but he was a man who was proud of his house, his family, and his property, and he felt that he had a right to be respected.
Jimmy had no trouble with that.
Thank you. My brother always told me you gotta respect to gain respect.
When the odd jobs kept coming in, Jimmy was more than happy to keep working. And a friendship was struck between this unlikely pair.
Jimmy, he introduced me to Baldomero as his friend. And he said, this is my friend, you know, I gotta go because I'm doing some work for him. So there was respect there, he said.
My dad did get along with him. It was a friendly relationship at one point.
Friendship and respect weren't the only things that mattered to Baldomero. His home was truly his castle.
Between the two homes of my father and Mr. Fernandez, there was a strip, a property that Mr. Fernandez believed it was his property.
He was protective of that piece of property.
He always said that that's his property, that no one should be on there, no one should park on there, that no one belonged on there.
The people who parked their car there were either Jimmy or Jimmy's friends. And I think that did bother my father. You know, here's a piece of property that's right next to my house, and I got to sit here and stare at your car because you're parking it in between our two houses.
Still, who wanted to go to war with a neighbor over a little piece of land?
Hey, Mr. Fernandez.
Baldomero kept right on hiring Jimmy.
All right, show me.
All of Jimmy's hard work finally paid off. He graduated from nursing school.
When he was done with school, yes, it was an accomplishment for him. He didn't have to study no more. And he seemed very happy. Relieved, really, that he knew he was going to make money in the world.
He wanted to be somebody that people looked up to. When he realized that money is important and it can get you things that you want, then he wanted to make money.
For the first time in a while, Jimmy didn't have to rely on anyone else.
Yeah, look at that.
Yeah, fits pretty well.
Hey, I want to need some help later today.
I can't, sorry. We have plans today.
Baldomero sure wasn't used to people saying no to him.
When Jimmy didn't want to work with no more, I think that's where the problem started.
Oh. You know how two people in the beginning are close, and then all of a sudden you're rejected and jilted. You feel like you're spurned.
My mom explained to me that the real reason why he stopped working for him was that he just felt uncomfortable and he didn't want to be around him because there was something strange about him.
And the gap between them was only going to widen.
There was definitely a generation gap between Jimmy and Mr. Fernandez.
Hey, where are you going? You can't be here. This is private property.
And I think everything went south.
Get out of here.
Especially with Jimmy coming into his own.
Hey, guys. You come fish over here.
I think after being in the Army for so long that he had to follow orders, and it made him feel like, you know, hey, I'm in command now, and this is what I'm going to do. And he lived his life, and he did it to the fullest.
That full life was about to be put on show for all to see.
Jimmy was a ladies' man. He loved women. Used to get him in a lot of trouble sometimes. I say, Jimmy, why don't you have just one girlfriend? He said, why have one when you can have three?
Mr. Fernandez, he was very religious. He was Catholic. He was probably against a lot of things my father did. any person that fixated in any kind of problem, it just starts to escalate. And when it starts turning into that obsession, very bad things can happen.
We're gonna have so much fun today.
With sides being drawn between these once friendly neighbors, it was only a matter of time before the neighborhood would be covered in blood. Neighbors Jimmy Escoto and Baldemiro Fernandez had struck up a fast friendship based on respect. But their differences were creating conflict, and the respect was dwindling away.
Jimmy had this knack for making other people envy him. Maybe part of it was his youth and his adventurousness.
My father was a very good mechanic. He would fix almost anything.
He had this antique truck, and it was a collector antique. He bought it, and he said he was going to fix it, and he made it a project.
But everyone knows that some people's projects can turn into other people's headaches.
We took the parts apart, and we were cleaning a lot of parts with solvents.
All right, this is gonna get that out.
God, what's in there?
It doesn't smell that bad.
What is in there?
Solvent.
Oh, that's strong. You know, the solvents were strong because I was complaining about them.
Oh, circular motion.
And the wind might have took the smell of solvents to his house.
My dad took a lot of stuff personally.
Things were sure getting toxic between the neighbors. But Baldemiro had a plan up his sleeve.
My parents were friends with Jimmy's mother, Olga. There are times where my parents would call her and tell her, you know, your son is doing such and such a thing. I would think that that might lead to even further attention, because as an adult, you don't want to be tattletold onto your mother.
I didn't understand what the argument was about. I think it was just a power struggle between Mr. Fernandez and Jimmy.
Jimmy would mention
Let's pack it up, guys.
that he was having an argument with the neighbor next door. He seemed a little bit concerned about it, like it was bothering him that they weren't getting along.
But Jimmy put his worries aside when he landed a dream job and became the envy of the neighborhood.
Mark? How you doing?
Jimmy got started into private nursing, and that's where he met Mark Bonacotti.
Right.
His father was Nick Bonacotti. He was a linebacker for the famous 1972 Dolphins that were undefeated.
Mark was 18 years old, was playing high school football, made a tackle, and broke his neck.
I was really fighting for my life. I was on a respirator. I couldn't breathe. It was like a living hell.
You know what? We're gonna get you off this respirator. I promise you.
My father, he was actually very proud to work for Mark Bonacotti. And he'd be like, look, son, this is who I'm working for now. So he was very proud to be able to take care of somebody of high stature.
And for Jimmy, this was definitely worth celebrating in style.
Jimmy had, I think, one of the biggest parties he's ever had. His whole nursing class came over, and I noticed how beautiful the women were. So I understood why he was so happy to go to class all the time.
And this didn't seem to sit well with Baldemiro.
Mr. Fernandez is from the old school. He wanted his neighborhood to be super quiet and, you know, no parties.
Especially when Baldemiro realized his daughter was also watching.
Mr. Escoto was 29 years old when this was all happening. Mr. Fernandez would complain about the loud music and about the naked women and goings-on that were not what he wanted his daughter to see.
If calling Jimmy's mother couldn't control her son's behavior, maybe calling the cops could.
I know that there were several disputes that Mr. Fernandez had with Jimmy. All the police can do is get there and try to settle the situation that's happening at that time. You know, let things cool down. It's not easy to police when you have these two people that are so distinctly different.
Party with some
Jimmy Escoto was very Americanized. He didn't have that type of Cuban culture that Mr. Fernandez had. Different generation, different culture, different outlook on life.
My father saw Mr. Fernandez as an old, grumpy neighbor who just wanted to control everyone's lives.
Mr. Fernandez started to complain about a variety of things.
Jimmy, you cannot park that boat there.
If the car was parked crooked in the driveway, he complained.
Gotta move. Cannot.
If there was one more motorcycle in the yard, he would complain. Jimmy is just the type of person that just wanted to do what he wanted to do, and, you know, and he did it.
I'm not moving my boat.
The whole Fernandez family had started to take notice.
Jimmy had stopped being the nice guy. As a child, I was Daddy's little girl. If you're not nice to my father, I'm not necessarily gonna like you. He just wasn't the cool neighbor anymore.
Baldemiro wasn't going to take that sitting down. It was time for him to draw a line in the sand.
Mr. Fernandez thought it was his land and that he had a right to what was and was not placed on the land, and by who. He had tried to get his neighbor to live a quieter, less ostentatious lifestyle, and it hadn't worked.
Can't park here anymore, Jimmy.
Had he been shown respect by Mr. Escoto, which he felt at his advanced age he had earned, then I'm sure this probably never would have happened.
Instead, Baldemiro's rage made him fixate on Jimmy.
He's always staring, you know, always watching his move. He used to know what time he went to sleep at night, what time he finished studying late at night, what time his girlfriend came over.
What are you doing?
He had actually came out and banged on the windows, say, "What are you guys doing? I'm Catholic. This is not the type of thing you should be doing."
Jim would always talk about this jerk neighbor, always pestering him, always complaining about this, that, or something else. And that he was sick and tired of this neighbor.
And Jimmy decided to push back. He filed a complaint, and the city official agreed with Jimmy's view of the fence.
Yeah, this fence is gonna have to come down, Mr. Fernandez.
What?
Mr. Fernandez, he had said, if you don't fix this problem to the city official, he goes, he has friends in high places, and he will get it fixed.
I'm gonna have this fixed. I know the mayor.
Mr. Fernandez, he didn't seem like he was such a big, powerful person himself. But I know he had friends that were in higher places.
Baldemiro's political pressure seemed to work when the fence stayed up.
The city official was replaced after that interaction. That goes to show how much pull this neighbor, Mr. Fernandez, had.
And now Jimmy was faced with a fight he's not sure he wants.
I think Jim had this balance. You have the angel on one shoulder and you have the devil on the other. And it's kind of difficult which way you're going to decide to go.
I see my father as a type where if you're going to meddle in my business, you're going to back me up into a corner. I'm going to come out swinging. You know, he's going to fight back. He's going to retaliate.
The two neighbors were locked onto a path of destruction that would leave no one unharmed. "62-year-old retiree Baldemiro Fernandez was locked in an ugly battle with his 29-year-old neighbor, Jimmy Escoto. With such an uneven pair facing off, folks feared how this heated feud would end.
My brother and I were outside playing in the yard, and then all of a sudden, I heard gunshots.
My father was with 82nd Airborne. He was an expert in assault rifles.
Did he try to f him off when he used to complain? Yeah, I think he did. I mean, who wouldn't after a while?
What are you doing? You cannot fire a gun here.
My father's fear was that that casing can land anywhere, and it could have actually hurt us while we were out there.
If I catch you firing a gun again, I'll kill you.
My Uncle Fred actually heard Mr. Fernandez yelling out to my father that I'm going to kill you one day.
And my brother was like, then go ahead.
Jimmy could have done it, man, easily. But he didn't. He didn't want to hurt the old man.
I know my father wasn't insane. I know he probably did things to retaliate towards the nuisance that he had as a next-door neighbor. But he was definitely, there was more good than bad in my father.
Yeah, I did them before.
The good really shone through when he got Mark off the respirator.
He was with me the whole time, every day. He was pushing me. Had he not done that, I probably wouldn't have survived, because I don't think I would have gotten off the respirator without him.
He's a very brave young man. At times he has his ups and downs and needs encouragement, but he usually comes out on his own and has some ideas. He's a fighter.
Yeah, it was just life-changing for all of us, you know?
At home, things were also changing, and Baldomero became more and more convinced that Jimmy was out to get him.
Anything that happened to Mr. Fernandez, he automatically blamed my father.
I mean, just from the history of what we were going through, we just assumed it was him.
Mr. Fernandez was concerned for his family's safety. That's probably why Mr. Fernandez called the police so many times.
Go inside, Anthony, go inside. I didn't do that.
Jimmy was really upset because he didn't want the police to come to his house.
Why would I throw bottles on their floor?
You know, as police officers, you do everything you can to try to keep the peace.
What do I have to do to prove myself?
There were attempts to try to quell this dispute and settle the situation. But, you know, you can't be there and babysit them 24/7.
Which is what it might have taken, because with the pressure always on, Jimmy's mind also started to fixate on his neighbor.
At some point, you don't want to push someone too hard, because he's going to push back.
And the devil on his shoulder was about to have his way.
I was coming home from ballet. My dad had picked me up at ballet practice. All of a sudden, Jimmy literally threw his truck in front of our car.
My God, he could have killed us.
It was almost like he was playing chicken with us. And it was scary. It was scary. My mom really started fearing for our lives, because it had now gone from being just a little feud between my dad and Jimmy to Jimmy was making our whole family's life a living hell.
Most situations involving neighbors who simply do not get along because of clashes of lifestyle are resolved within the system. On some occasions, unfortunately, a spark is igniting a fire and the line gets crossed. Mr. Fernandez was afraid of his next-door neighbor.
Calls to 911. Police says, oh, there's nothing we can do. There's no proof.
We're not witnessing these allegations that you're saying. They're trying to de-escalate and prevent tragedy. But, you know, the police can only do so much when they respond to these types of calls.
With the feud escalating, police offered help from the state.
They have these intervention programs that maybe they can help you work out. They'll call you both in, and they'll try to settle it that way.
After repeated calls to police and the state attorney's office, Baldomero didn't see a way out.
He told me that he was feeling like the system was failing him, that he didn't know what else he could do, that he had tried to work within the system, but that nothing was working, and that he and his family were being intentionally tortured by someone, and there was nothing that they seemed to be able to do about it. It certainly was a pressure cooker that kept building and building and building. I'm not sure anybody ever anticipated it building to the extent that it did.
So Baldomero made a last-ditch effort and went back to the one person he thought could get through to Jimmy, his mother, Olga.
Jimmy was gone at the time. Baldomero had called her.
My father said, I'm tired of this feud I'm having with the neighbor. At that point, he wanted to move on with his life.
Jimmy was in New York City starting a new job as Mark Bonacante's private nurse.
The first annual Great Sports Legends Dinner, which Jim came with me, hobnobbing with all these celebrities, Howard Cosell, President Nixon. I think he was happy, and I don't think he foresaw anything in the future that caused him much concern.
Back home, Baldomero was on the brink.
Baldomero had told her that there was a big problem with them and that he couldn't take it anymore. And he had said that she better do something. So he was crying for help. He was asking for help. And she better do something right away, because the next time that he sees Jimmy or his son, that he was going to kill him.
Bartolomeo? Hello?
No one really believed that Baldomero had murder in him. But with death threats looming, everyone feared that things had reached their boiling point. For exclusive footage, go to investigationdiscovery.com. Jimmy had just returned from a successful business trip in New York City. Little does he know that his next-door neighbor, Baldomero Fernandez, had threatened to kill him and his son.
He had said that Olga better do something right away, because one of them is going to go to jail, the other one is going to go to the cemetery.
The call worried Olga to no end. She didn't want Jimmy to have any more ammunition against his older neighbor.
Olga didn't tell Jimmy anything about that threat, hoping that it would disappear by not mentioning anything about it.
Got in?
She felt that if Anthony was there, Baldomero wouldn't follow through and, would have mercy on him.
At first, her plan seemed to work.
I was excited to ride my bike, the bike that my father fixed. My father, he trusted me, and he just said, just stay off the street, just stay on the sidewalks, and, wait for the red lights.
The Fernandez house was also in celebration mode.
That day was a few days before my father's birthday. My sister and I had actually gone out to buy my father a birthday present.
So no one was at all prepared for what was to come next.
My father and my mother were home, and my father was taking a nap in his bedroom. His bedroom was just past mine.
Anthony!
And when Anthony seemed to be away for too long, Jimmy sensed trouble.
Anthony, he's another freedom rider, too. He liked to take off like Jimmy used to do. Sometimes he used to get carried away with playing with other kids and lose track of time.
And I would just roam around the neighborhood.
But it wasn't Anthony that Jimmy needed to worry about.
Had to be something that broke the camel's back that day.
And all of a sudden, you know, everyone in the house hears a motorcycle revving in our yard. Jimmy came into our yard with his motorcycle, revved it, and even tore up grass in our yard. And shortly thereafter, I hear my dad come out of his bedroom yelling.
The pot, boiling with rage, was about to spill over.
I'm gonna kill you when you get by.
You know, it's like crying wolf. I mean, somebody keeps on telling you they're going to kill you, they're going to kill you, they're going to kill you. You don't really take them seriously. And I guess maybe this gentleman decided, well, you know, you're going to have to take me seriously today.
And I hear my parents arguing, and I see my dad walking past me in the hallway with his gun. I thought, oh, this is not good.
Mr. Fernandez had had enough out of what was probably a combination of frustration and anger. He drove across Mr. Escato's lawn.
He was very much in a rage, and then trying to calm down when Jimmy came back.
What's the matter with you? I told you, you little punk! Are you crazy?
The two got into an argument.
Move it! You're insane! Get off my lawn!
Mr. Escato approached Mr. Fernandez's car.
Get off! Get off my lawn!
And I was frozen. I did not know whether to run and hide, whether to go help. I did not know what to do.
Now, move your car! Move it!
Mr. Fernandez reached for the gun.
Come any closer, I shoot you!
And pointed it out the window toward Mr. Escato and said, "Go away, leave me alone. I don't want any trouble. If you come closer, I may have to use the gun."
Don't come any closer, you little punk!
My father said, "Shoot me, old man. I don't believe you're going to shoot me. I don't think you have the guts."
You don't have the guts!
But Baldomero had reached a point of no return.
Mr. Escato started to run. Mr. Fernandez exited his car with the firearm in hand, continued to fire at Mr. Escato. And hit him with one additional shot.
My sister said, "Oh, did you hear that?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, but it could be firecrackers." And then she goes, "No, it sounded like a shot."
My father, in fear for his life, he started running house to house.
And then that's when we saw the men coming this way, and we realized it was a shot. He was scared. All he kept saying as he was walking was, "Help me, help me." I was going towards the victim when I saw the older man behind him. I thought he was coming to help him, until I saw the gun in his hand. I turned around, grabbed my kid, and ran.
Now there's no escape. He's bleeding. He knows this is it. This is the end.
I started screaming, you know, "Get down!" And I started calling the cops. The cops told me to stay down, that they would send help immediately.
There were no more bullets left in the gun.
With an empty chamber and police on the way, everyone thought the worst was over. Who could have known it had just begun? Our tiny Flagami neighborhood was ripped apart when Baldomero Fernandez shot his next-door neighbor, Jimmy Escoto, in cold blood, and then chased him down.
Mr. Fernandez continued to empty his gun.
I was screaming to the cops, hurry up. Oh my God, he's gonna kill him, he's gonna kill him. Please hurry up, hurry up.
Mr. Escoto, losing blood and getting a little bit weaker from the loss of blood, runs from Mr. Fernandez.
He was trying to get away. He was weak. He needed help. I could have made it different. I could have. But I didn't.
He's killing him, please! Can you hurry, please?
And that's when I kept saying, hurry up, he's gonna kill him.
Please, he's gonna kill him! You have to hurry!
My mom tackled him, took away his gun. So my mom disarmed him. My mom tried stopping him. My mom tried separating them. But at that point, it was too late.
Mr. Fernandez, once the gun was taken out of his hand, obtained from a very short distance away a large cinder block.
And he was trying to get up. He kept hitting him.
Mr. Fernandez struck Mr. Escoto approximately a dozen times over the head with the cinder block.
Do I wish I could erase it from my memory? Yes, I do, but I can't.
The paramedics arrived to find a gruesome scene, but there was a small sign of hope.
When I arrived, Jimmy had some signs of life.
They were giving him CPR, pumping his heart.
All right, load and go right now, let's go.
I mean, if you're gonna live, you better get to the hospital very quickly so that they can operate. If it's a small amount of hope, I'm gonna give them that hope. In the back of my mind, I knew he had a kid, so try to save him if you can.
It was a nice day, and it was just never thought of anything else, just riding bike. I would never imagine coming back to what I came back to. When I pulled up on my bicycle, the police were already there, and I had that blank stare in my face like, hey, what's going on? I could never imagine my father was a part of this. My father's friend, when he said Jimmy was shot, that was a big deal. I was thinking, like, is he gonna be all right? What's gonna happen?
Jimmy was rushed to Jackson Memorial, the very hospital he'd worked at.
We were hoping that everything was going to be okay. I mean, nobody would believe that that was the end of him.
With doctors fighting to save Jimmy's life, police turned their attention to the vicious neighbor attack to find out what went so wrong.
Mr. Fernandez clearly indicated that the only reason he fired the shot was that he was in fear of death or great bodily harm at the hands of Mr. Escoto.
My dad said Jimmy had the chain. And he whipped my dad with the chain.
And self-defense was only half the story.
When you fire a firearm in an enclosed space, it is an incredibly, incredibly loud, explosive noise. The sound of the noise, the stress of the situation, caused him to temporarily lose his normal sanity. He had no memory of the actual acts that he had committed. From the time that the shot was fired, initially, until the time that he was later in a police car and talking to the police.
This was little consolation for Jimmy's family.
After maybe an hour of waiting, the doctor comes back, and he said that you couldn't do anything. You couldn't save him.
I felt that, you know, maybe if I didn't take so long, maybe none of this would have happened. So a lot of guilt does burden me, you know, over the years. Still a little hard to believe.
Never in my wildest dreams thought my father was going to kill him.
Neither did anyone else. But news from the police investigation made folks think twice about the details of the murder.
When we interviewed Mr. Fernandez, I had him take off his shirt, took photographs. There was no evidence of being struck by a chain. The way he described would have left, undoubtedly would have left some marks or some kind of evidence.
I don't think Jimmy had anything in his hand to defend himself with. That's why he ran, because he knew he couldn't fight the gun. He had to run from it.
You know, if he would have stayed in his car and that Jimmy ran away and that was the end of it, then there could be the justification of the self-defense.
It wasn't self-defense. He murdered him. Plain as day. It's a little overkill when you crush somebody's skull with a rock after you shot him multiple times.
I believe 100% this is premeditated. There's no doubt in my mind.
After a plea deal, Baldomero Fernandez was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 7 years in prison, but he served much less.
Knowing that Mr. Fernandez served only 3.5 years for the murder of my father, I think it's a joke, and I compare that to just petty theft on the street. People could be stealing cars, stealing drugs, and they serve 10, 20 years for that.
And the short sentence brought back rumors of political influence, which some passionately denied.
There were no political connections used in getting a plea bargain, and there were no political connections used in getting a reduced sentence.
Mr. Fernandez, whenever I would speak to him, would say, I wish this day had never happened. I wish I could take back this day. No matter what kind of trouble I had with him, this should never have happened. He was extremely remorseful about what had happened.
Jimmy was murdered twice. Like, the first time wasn't bad enough. You know, they just never gave him a fair shot. He didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve to be murdered like that. He was very loving, compassionate, caring. I think he was one of the greatest persons I've ever known.
I was with him for a year, and I saw a caring guy who led by example and dedicated a lot of his life for me.
Nothing could ever replace what I lost with my father, and there's not a day goes by I don't think about him. He was definitely robbed from me. He was taken away from me.